The Dance of the Dragons is a poetic name for a bloody civil war between Rhaenyra Targaryen and her younger half-brother Aegon Targaryen. The two of them went to war based on precedents that a son should come before the daughter. It would be easy to solely blame Aegon's Green faction for this war, but the seeds of this bloody conflict have been planted way before Aegon and Rhaenyra have even been born. How did these seeds grow into a monstrosity that ended in such a tragedy? Who actually set the precedents that a son comes before a daughter? Who is actually to blame for the Dance of the Dragons? Before we start, remember that if you like my content, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share so that more people can see it. Make sure to click the notification button so that you never miss a new video. We don't know too much about the laws of primogeniture of Old Valyria, from which the Targaryen dynasty originally came from. Valyria was different from Westeros. Their society was not necessarily feudal. They were not kings or lords. Their system of governance rather resembled an oligarchy. It was customary for oldest children to marry one another, and while one would hesitate to call it absolute primogeniture, they were certainly less patriarchal than Westeros. Famously, Aegon and Elaena jointly ruled Dragonstone before Aegon the Conqueror was even born. Aegon's polygamous marriage to his sister wives was unusual, though not unprecedented. He married his older sister Visenya, as was customary among the Valyrians, but also took a second wife, his younger sister Rhaenys, wedding one out of duty, the other one out of desire. When the three of them decided to unify Westeros into a singular entity, they had to take into account local customs and culture to make their new subjects accept them. They spoke the common tongue, converted to the Faith of the Seven, and introduced heraldry that was not used in Valyria, but that assimilation also meant that they had to grapple with Westeros's inheritance laws. As such, Aegon, though younger than Visenya, was the central figure of this conquest and the one to actually ascend the throne as a monarch, not Visenya. In a way, that has been the very first seed that the Targaryens would eventually fully accept the inheritance laws as well. Only Dorne had laws of absolute primogeniture, and in every other place, if a woman did rule, it was in place of a man. For example, Shara Arryn did rule the Vale, but not in her own right, but as her son's regent. Nonetheless, Rhaenys and Visenya were unique as Targaryen queens. They were the only ones allowed to sit on the Iron Throne, thus implying that rather than queen consorts, they were queen regents. They took care of administrative affairs, passed laws, and advised their brother, who valued their insight just as much as he valued insights of men. Visenya and Rhaenys fought alongside Aegon and commanded armies, with Visenya even wielding a sword and being a skilled warrior. Visenya was the one to establish the Kingsguard, and Rhaenys introduced laws to protect women and children, such as the Rule of Six. Notably, Rhaenys, even as a queen, did not have enough power to completely abolish domestic violence, since violence against women was too deeply ingrained into Westeros as a symptom of patriarchy, and she would be met with severe backlash if she was to outlaw it completely. It is, however, worth noting that these laws were not respected anyway. Long after the Dance of the Dragons, a young woman named Magette caught the eye of King Aegon IV, and he quite literally bought her to be his mistress. He had to eventually cast her aside, and within a year, her husband beat her to death. This is one of the examples of how women's rule, being undermined by the dance, affected not only the princesses, but also common women. A law introduced by Queen Rhaenys was rendered null and void. Rhaenys and Visenya both had sons, Aenys and Maegor, and their reigns caused a succession crisis. Who should come first in the line of succession? The king's brother or his firstborn son? Maegor proclaimed himself a king, and his nephew Aegon, Aenys' son, perished while fighting his uncle. Maegor then married his widow Rhaena, who already had 2 children. Maegor's reign was marked by his inability to have healthy children. All of the babies born to him had birth defects, so he proclaimed Rhaena's oldest child, Aeria, as his heir, but with an asterisk, until such time as the gods grant me a son. Maegor's tyranny ended with Jaehaerys I ascending the throne. Somehow in all this, it was forgotten that it's Rhaena who is the oldest child of Aenys. In a way, she was usurped thrice. By Aegon, by Maegor, and finally by Jaehaerys. Rhaena herself said once to her sister Alysanne, "You have everything, and I have nothing. You have my throne. Content yourself with that." My throne. While this seems more as the words of a bitter, angry woman who went through a lot of pain, there is some truth in that. Maegor actually usurped Rhaena. Alysanne was heavily involved in ruling the realm alongside her husband Jaehaerys, though we already see that her position was lower than the position of Visenya and Rhaenys. For one, Alysanne never sat the Iron Throne, and while she sat on the small council, Jaehaerys did not offer her the position of a hand or give her an official title, such as Master of Laws, not even proclaiming her Queen Regent. It also becomes apparent that he did not value her advice if she did not agree with what he already wanted. Namely, Jaehaerys, only a third-generation Targaryen ruler, already seemed to prefer male primogeniture present in Westeros via Andal inheritance laws. The issue of female inheritance appeared twice during Jaehaerys' reign. Firstly, when Jaehaerys began acting like his son Aemon will be his heir, rather than his daughter Daenerys, who was older. Jaehaerys loved all three children fiercely, but from the moment Aemon was born, the king began to speak of him as his heir, to Queen Alysanne's displeasure. Daenerys is older, she would remind his grace. She is first in line, she should be queen. The king would never disagree, except to say, she shall be queen, when she and Aemon marry. They will rule together, just as we have. But Bennifer could see that the king's words did not entirely please the queen, as he noted in his letters. And secondly, when Jaehaerys intended to pass over his granddaughter Rhaenys. The most prominent dissenter was good Queen Alysanne, who had helped her husband rule the Seven Kingdoms for many years, and now saw her son's daughter being passed over because of her sex. "A ruler needs a good head and a true heart," she famously told the king. "A cock is not essential. If your grace truly believes that women lack the wit to rule, plainly you have no further need of me." And thus Queen Alysanne departed King's Landing and flew to Dragonstone on her dragon, Silverwing. She and King Jaehaerys remained apart for 2 years, the period of estrangement recorded in the histories as the Second Quarrel. Alysanne was also notable for abolishing the law of the first night. The custom states that when small folk marry, their lord or king has the privilege to bed the bride on the first night. Yet long after Alysanne's death and the extinction of dragons, we learn that the first night is still practiced in the north, making it a parallel to Rhaenys' rule of 6, that was forgotten or ignored due to women losing the political power after the dance. Alysanne's inferior position as compared to Rhaenys and Visenya shows that the power Targaryen women could hold was getting limited with each generation. Alysanne herself was reduced to a baby factory, having given birth to 13 children, the last of which was Gael, who was born when Alysanne was 44 years old. Some of them died in the cradle, and all but 3 outlived their parents. It is perhaps the tragedies that had befallen their daughters that best illustrate just how patriarchal Jaehaerys had become. Firstly, only Alyssa was allowed to claim a dragon, while all other daughters were forbidden from it, even though Saera tried to do it in an act of desperation. That is perhaps due to the fact that Jaehaerys did not want other houses to get hold of the dragons, since only Alyssa was married to her brother, but it highlights that dragons are connected to women's power and authority. While even a woman who has a dragon is not free from patriarchal violence, she has infinitely more power than the one who does not. Dragonless Visera was betrothed to a man who already had heirs, which was an objectively bad match, while Daela was forced to give birth while she was young and sickly. The subtle patriarchal violence inflicted on Daela caused her death. She and Visera were treated as no more than cattle, bargaining chips to make Jaehaerys' connections that much wide-spanning. And both of them died, almost as if to make their parents reconsider those choices, which neither of them did. Since Jaehaerys and Alysanne had so many children, who in turn also had many children, the matter of succession was to be decided by the Great Council of 1001 AC, held in Harrenhal. Eventually the choice came in between Viserys Targaryen, the oldest son of Balon, Jaehaerys' second son, Rhaenys Targaryen, a daughter of Aemon, Jaehaerys' oldest son, and finally Laenor Velaryon, Rhaenys' son with Corlys Velaryon. Rhaenys was explicitly dismissed because she was a woman. Thus, a choice was between Laenor and Viserys, and eventually, because Laenor's claim came from his mother, Viserys was chosen, to Jaehaerys' delight, since he was his preferred candidate. As such, the council cemented the already existing precedents in stone. A son comes before a daughter, no matter what. King Viserys reigned peacefully with his wife Aemma Arryn by his side. Yet a tragedy struck him. Aemma died in childbirth, just like her mother before her. Her only child to survive infancy was Rhaenyra, a girl. Viserys therefore did something unthinkable. He passed over his brother Daemon in the line of succession and named 8-year-old Rhaenyra his heir in a lavish ceremony, where every lord of the realm swore loyalty to her and promised to defend her rights. Rhaenyra attended the small council as a cupbearer and observed how the politics and ruling are done. Viserys was urged to remarry and chose Alicent Hightower. Alicent gave birth to 3 sons in rapid succession, yet Viserys refused to change the succession. That did not stop the Hightowers from conspiring in order to undermine Rhaenyra and eventually usurp her. Resentment brewed, with Viserys, who hated conflict, not acting in order to do anything to alleviate it or secure Rhaenyra's rights any further. The moment Viserys died, the Hightowers crowned his oldest son Aegon, and the rest is history. After the dust settled, it was made clear what the result will be. No woman will have a chance to sit on the throne ever again, no matter what. She will always be overlooked in favor of her closest male relative. Rhaenyra wasn't the first woman to be usurped, nor was she the last, as later history shows, for example with Rhaena Targaryen. It all started with Rhaena Targaryen, the oldest grandchild of Aegon the Conqueror, who was usurped by Aegon, Maegor, and Jaehaerys. Her daughter Aeria was considered as Maegor's heir for a time too, but that was a half measure until he had a son. After that came Daenerys, who was overlooked by Jaehaerys in favor of a man. Then came the Great Council and Rhaenys, the queen who never was, and then finally Rhaenyra. Rhaena, Aeria, Daenerys, Rhaenys, Rhaenyra. 5 women who were denied their inheritance on behalf of their gender. Therefore, who is to blame? First person who had some amount of blame in this was Aegon the Conqueror himself, who did not establish absolute primogeniture even though he could. Second person to blame was undoubtedly Jaehaerys, in more than one way, namely by pressing his own claim ahead of Rhaena, and for the second time, where he favored Viserys as his heir, disregarding what Alysanne had said, that you don't have to be a man to be a good ruler. The last person to bear responsibility was Viserys himself, who did not realize a conspiracy right under his nose, and his aversion to conflict prevented him from being more firm and from securing Rhaenyra's rights further, as well as establishing that she isn't just a singular example, but that the crown ought to treat it as a norm now, absolute primogeniture, rather than a male one. In a way, all of these men failed the kingdom and failed their women, though in the case of Aegon it was a mere oversight, and in the case of Viserys it was his lack of firmness. The only person to actually and maliciously work against female inheritance was, however, Jaehaerys. And as good of a king as he was, his misogyny was a fatal flaw that saw the ruin of his house. Thanks for watching. Remember that if you like my content, like, comment, subscribe and share so that more people can see it. Make sure to click the notification button so that you never miss a new video.